So thanks a lot for sticking around. Let me introduce my two panelists right now. First off, the executive producer and creator of Bojack Horseman, Mr. Raphael Bob Waksberg. I already screwed up your name. How did I do that?
And the writer of that episode.
And the writer of that episode, of course. I won't screw this one up. The executive producer and star of Bojack Horseman, Mr. Will Arnett. So I weirdly often think of this episode for two things. First off, I often think of the theory of Becker. For some reason, that stayed with me.
Oh, good. I'm glad we can introduce that to the larger conversation.
Yeah, I think the papers will eventually be written about this theory of Becker because there's a lot to be said. And I hope one day Ted Danson actually watches this episode and you converse over that.
I think less the theory of Becker and more a Becker theory of grief.
Yes.
It's Becker's used to describe this
My
feeling.
question is, do you think that if Ted Danson were to watch this episode, would he admit it? You know?
Yeah.
Like,
And
Raphael
also,
was right.
I'd like to,
Oh, so he had a great relationship with his mother because it's like Becker. Okay, yeah. A great show that I really love. So understood.
we might be able to find out from our friends at Netflix whether there's a spike in viewings of Beck. I don't know if it's on. It should be.
You think Ted Danson would house
Companion piece.
Dude, it was like, why is this show good? This is what we did this. It's the same thing. It's a grumpy doctor. Why does everyone love House? Guys, Becker.
See, I think often about Becker. And then the other thing I think about is earlier this year when there was the whole scandal over the coffee cup on Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
You predicted that.
We predicted it. Did we predict it or did we put the cup there?
It's a long game.
You know.
Don't admit to anything.
Oh.
It is the long game.
You know where that story came from? The thing about the coffee cup and the subjective memory thing is when I was in college, I was a big fan of Pulp Fiction, and I had like the special DVD, and there was like a documentary where it pointed out that because it cycles back from the beginning and the end, and they're doing the robbery at this restaurant. These two guys are sitting at the restaurant, like the scenes cross over. But if you actually watch both scenes, you'd see that like the order of it is like slightly off from the beginning and the end. But like he says garçon at the wrong time, or it doesn't quite match up. And there's this thing on the collector's edition DVD of Pulp Fiction. There's this like documentary about it. Actually, Quentin Tarantino did that on purpose because it's to show that two different people had different ideas of what this. I don't think he did that on purpose. He doesn't even know how to spell Inglorious Bastards. No way.
So the continuity error turns into
You make a
the
thing out of
artist,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, who cares, right? In general.
In general, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Raphael, you opened this by asking how many people had watched the show before, and there's a number of people who haven't. This is their first time seeing the.
Oh yeah, I didn't see that poll. How many people would this is their first time watching BoJack
You can
Horseman?
raise your hands this time.
Raise your hand. That'd be great.
They're all like this. Every episode. They're all talking. It's the easiest paycheck Aaron Paul has ever gotten.
Because I was sitting there like imagining, okay, what if I'd never seen this show before?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a really interesting episode, but it only tells a little bit of what this show is in this universe. So in some ways, this is kind of a unique episode to put out there and to be nominated.
Yeah, and I think it definitely works as a piece of this larger whole, and in contrast to other episodes. But I also think it is a great little story in of itself. I hope you guys liked it. I think it's. I think Will does this whole beautiful little one-man show in it, and I always love watching it, and so I thought it would be a strong episode to submit, and I guess the Academy agreed.
Yeah, and what's great about it, every year you sort of have those one or two standout episodes that everyone talks about that sort of stand out among the narrative that you're telling. And this season, talk about the origins of doing what essentially is almost like a bottle episode. If this was a live action show, it would be a bottle episode, save a couple of bucks.
Yeah. Well, every year, we in the writers' room try to challenge ourselves more and think of like what are kinds of episodes we haven't done before. What's a new way of doing an episode of BoJack Horseman? Keep it interesting for us. And the idea of doing a monologue was really interesting. I think we're really emboldened by the fact that we knew we had this amazing actor in Will, who 5 seasons deep now has given this incredible performance year after year after year. I think this isn't the kind of thing we'd have the confidence to try in season 1, but I think in season 5 I felt like, no, he can pull this off. And I even remember the table read for this episode was like, how can he pull it off? And then it was just this amazing one-man show where Will came in and he read through it, and it felt like, yeah, I think we got an episode here. And so the idea was first, let's do this monologue, and then it was, okay, how do you justify that in, what's a heavy enough story given our characters that would justify spending a half hour on just Bojack talking, and this relationship with his mother is something we've set up over several seasons now, and so it felt like an excellent payoff to that story.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it felt like a lot of this was earned, and we know Bojack so well at this point that you can sit there for 30 minutes or 25 minutes and sort of, you know this character so well, and so it doesn't feel like you're even sort of just staring at one character the entire time, because your imagination is going places. Will, how did you feel about this, and when Raphael first came to you and said, okay, this is what we're doing for this episode?
Well, Raphael had sort of tipped me off that there was something special coming, and that this was going to be, before I read the script, kind of what it was going to be around and what it was going to be like. And then when I first read it, I was, one of the hallmarks of this show, as you kind of pointed out, was that I feel like every season, and not just once a season, a few times, Raphael and the writers take a lot of risks and do things that you've never seen before. And certainly as an actor, we are constantly given material that I just haven't seen before. Oftentimes you'll do things where you'll tell jokes that kind of resemble something you've done before. You can they're familiar in terms of the just the pace of it or the setup or whatever. And it's just never felt that way with Raphael, which is really remarkable, considering how many episodes there are just in general. But this definitely was something that I remember going into the table read. I was talking to my friend Noel before about the fact that I'd read the table draft, and then on the way to the table read called my mom. Just because I felt so shaky at the time. It was really impactful, and then the actual episode itself was very impactful. And
wasn't your sister in that?
And my sister was here, and my sister was really shaken by it, because it was, if you're from a family, I don't know how many people.
Raise your hand if you have parents.
So you can relate to it, and I think that my sister, and it was a wild day.
What was that table read like? Because it's just you.
Yeah, it was just me. I mean, with Raphael and
we had Nick doing stage directions.
Yeah,
very limited stage.
Very limited stage directions, and then nobody else from the cast was there, it was a very. But there were a lot of people there in attendance. A bunch of people who were in this room were there. We were talking about it before, and I remember calling my friend Lewis afterwards. He was reminding me that I called him after. And just saying, we've just done something that's really, I think, kind of very different. And I've never done anything like it, and I think that you're going to enjoy it. But it was
incredible. I mean, I'll say, as an audience member at that table read, like I said, we weren't sure if this was going to work, and then hearing Will do it, we knew it was going to work. And you guys saw that episode, you saw what it is, and it was him doing that live in a room for 30 minutes. And you could hear a pin drop. It was like everyone was on the edge of their seat. I remember talking to Amy Winfrey, who was the director of this episode. And I was really excited when I heard she was going to direct, because she's done a lot of she's directed more episodes of the show than anyone else. But she's especially directed some of our more intimate conversations. She did one a couple seasons back that was just Bojack and Princess Carolyn in a restaurant arguing. And that it required a lot of just facial micro expressions and just real subtle face acting. And so I knew, okay, it's in good hands with Amy, that she'll make sure, because we took away a lot of the tools of animation that we normally use in an episode. You normally have a ton of background gags, a ton of different animals wandering by, lots of rat-a-tat dialogue, and we kind of had one arm tied behind her back. And so I said to Amy before the table, I said, we're trying something here, but we're going to record this script. And if you feel like as you're animating it, maybe you want to flash back to some of these stories he's describing, or like show some of them, we can that can be our plan B. And after we heard Will read it, she said, I don't think we're going to need the plan B. I think we're just going to be on Bojack the whole
But
time.
I think Raphael pointed out, that this deep into doing this show, we had the benefit of having done a lot of episodes, and we understood each other. And there is, that first of all, the script is, from moment one was, again, like nothing else I'd ever read, really phenomenal. Those beats were really, for me, I really understood what they were, and the way that Raphael wrote it, it's so beautiful and really well laid out. And I think that it was just like, that was a culmination of us having worked together for a number of years and kind of really feeling each other at that moment.
Yeah.
I was thinking, and happy enough, I've watched this episode several times now, and as I watched it, I think, what would it be like to see Will Arnett actually perform this live?
Well, you're in luck!
For the next half hour.
Wheel my mom in.
Have you thought about that at all?
Doing a live read of it?
We talked about
Yeah.
it. We have talked about it before.
When the time is right.
When the time is, as soon as the show is 10 years off the air, well, that's when we strike.
Yeah.
We have talked about it a couple times. We talked about like doing it in a theater and that kind of thing. I don't know,
Something to think about.
Yeah, it is something to think about.
Peppering that out there. And
Yeah.
Broadway, here we come!
Bojack on stage.
Yeah,
Live on
a
stage.
25-minute show.
Bojack on ice.
Are you kidding me? Sorry, I'm sorry to have to have a business meeting.
Yeah.
Just think of it.
You're all way over right now.
25 minutes per episode. We could do
5 shows a night.
16 shows a day. Okay? Think about that. You think about that.
Okay, I'll think about it.
Was you kind of described a little bit on the sort of the animation and doing things a little differently with this episode. Would you say it was the level of difficulty was higher, lower, the same, just different?
I'd say
producing this
different.
episode?
I'd say, I think it would be wrong from an animation perspective to look at this episode and say, oh, this is easier than most episodes because it's just, Bojack in one room. I'd say from a design perspective it was probably easier. There are fewer backgrounds than normal episodes.
Yeah.
And from an actor's perspective, if you're not Will Arnett, this was an easier episode than most weeks. Paul F. Tompkins really took a paycheck. But I think from an animation perspective, I think in some ways it is more difficult because it all relies on this very subtle face acting, and you have to keep the audience's interest for 25 minutes without some of the bells and whistles and usual tricks. And I think you kind of take it for granted as you watch it because it feels so natural and it feels so lived in. And you watch and go, oh, that's just Bojack giving a speech. And you kind of don't think about like all the tiny decisions that have to be made of like, when is he upset, or when is he smiling, or when does he sound upset but he's smiling, or when does he sound happy but his face is upset. And it's like every single decision that had to be made there, first by Will in the booth, but then a second time by the animators, figuring out beat by beat how this episode is going to play.
Yeah, well, what was it like in the booth? Did you record this all in the course of, say, a single day? Was it several recordings?
No, it was all one.
No, it was a one. We did the table read as per usual. We did the table read and then a week later recorded it. And I know this is something we were also discussing beforehand, that there was some discussion as to why we didn't
Just record the
table
table.
read. It was a great table read. But then the way the show is usually done is we record, each cast member records their stuff on their own. And then they animate to once they get all that stuff, then they put the show together and animate.
Yeah.
And so I usually, like everybody else, I read with Raphael. Raphael and I do scenes together. We'll often do a full scene and then we'll go back and we'll get pieces that we need. In this particular instance, of course, there's no back and forth, except for the first scene, which he helped me with because there was with young Bojack and with his dad. But and so we just read it through one day. I think we had a pretty good understanding after the table read what it was and what the tenor of this particular show was and what the important things were. We talked a little bit, and then I think we did it 2 or 3 times
Yeah,
through.
I think you basically went once through and you stopped a couple times to go back and just do a paragraph again.
Yeah.
But most of it is the first take is in there.
Yeah.
And that's, we, especially with an episode like this, we didn't want to wear you out and be like, all right, we're going to do 8 takes of this first paragraph and then see how we're doing on paragraph 2. So I really wanted to make sure we got to the end of the episode. And then something that Will taught me very early on in the show's run, because I was very new to this whole thing.
This is going to be news. I've never taught anybody anything.
This is actually very helpful. I remember we had a meeting early on in the show where you said, we don't need to be getting so many takes. Because I was really like, we have to get like every possible version of this line. And you said, Raphael, I'm coming back next week. Like, if we didn't get it, it's not like we have to like rent out the stadium and hook up the rain machine again for a pickup. Like, it's really easy. Like, trust that we're getting it. And since then, and that was very early on, I've been much better. Being like, okay, no, we got it. And then knowing, okay, Will's coming back, we need to pick it up. And we've very rarely needed to pick something up. That Will and the other amazing actors we have are good enough. They have good instincts, and they know what's good. And I trust myself to know what's good in the moment and not like over prepare or feel like we have to get too much of it. And so, especially on this episode, I felt like I didn't want to get take after take after take. I wanted to feel the momentum and feel the flow of it, knowing that if we needed something, we could always pick it up later.
One of the advantages of animation is that, not to say that that it's not great working with great actors, but one of the advantages is, especially with this, is that I get to work with Raphael and do scenes with Raphael. And that kind of dance of Raphael reading other characters just in general is really important and really informative, because you get I get a clear sense from him of exactly not somebody else's interpretation, but of his where he wants the scene to go.
I'm expecting the flow.
Which is really interesting, and is kind of you get to kind of mainline right into the source a little bit. The other thing to note is, because Aaron's been busy and working out of town a lot the last few years. Raphael is an incredible Todd at the table and in the booth. I mean, Aaron's amazing.
Yes.
Aaron's amazing, but
you wouldn't know it from this episode.
I've worked so much. You wouldn't know it, Jeff. I've worked over the years so much. To me, Todd is Raphael. It's so strange.
And that's why Raphael's in the new Breaking Bad movie.
That's right. I'm also affiliated for
I did not know that, but wow, that's a great guess.
That's a big switcheroo. That does bring up an interesting point, Will. I'm always curious about actors who also do voiceover and the different muscles. And in particular, you're so used to going back and forth and playing with your acting partner, with having that sort of relationship. But with voice acting, for the most part, you're not with that person in the room. So how do you adjust for that? How do you play with a character who's not there or an actor who's not there?
Well, if you're not doing it like this, like we do on Bojack with Raphael, in films, I've done it every way. When we did the Lego movies, Chris Pratt and I did a bunch of stuff together in the Lego Batman. Galvin Axe and I did a bunch of stuff together, but certainly not all the time. I'm working on an animated film right now. I just came from it, so my voice is even more hoarse than usual.
How appropriate.
Yeah. Pun intended.
I didn't even have time to say pun intended. That's how tired I am.
Got it for you.
Yeah, but and in that case, I worked all day today just basically on my own, reading with the director, but also just sort of working in a vacuum a little bit. And some of the advantages are that you get to again kind of drive a scene a certain direction that you want it to go. And if your choices are really good,
They'll take that back.
They'll take that and they'll make the other actors kind of play along to what you were doing. So you don't have to bully them on set.
But that is often why.
Okay, you guys.
Why when we do it this way, we get the individual actors, we do try to get different takes and a wide variety of stuff, because we don't want to be stuck in the edit with one person shouting and one person stuck in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But I think because I have a good sense of what these scenes are beforehand.
I would say maybe a fifth of the time you'll say, do it this way, maybe do it this other way just in case, as insurance, as an option. You'll say do it better as an option.
Just so we have a good take. We probably won't need it, but just so we have a good one.
Which is mean. Which is really mean to say.
Let's talk about this episode comes midway through season 5.
Yes.
So in some ways it's sort of like you've got the first half of the season where, Filbert is beginning, and then the second half when you really come to terms with, Bojack struggling with what it means to be good or bad, and some of the issues that, he struggles with leading up to the finale, which since a lot of people haven't seen, I won't spoil. But, how would you sort of describe Bojack's journey in season 5?
Well, I think this episode's actually...
I would describe Box of Water as hard to drink. I would describe it as really hard to drink.
Yeah. Saving the world, but hard to drink.
Sorry. Go ahead.
You know what they say, you can lead Will to water. But you can't make him drink it from a box. I think this episode is a linchpin in one of the major themes of the season, which is about Bojack struggling with this idea of whether or not he needs help, or whether admitting he needs help is a weakness, and whether the correct thing to do is to think you can do it by yourself, and that, kind of the conclusion he comes to this episode is that there's no one looking out for him, and that it's wrong for him to think that there ever could be, and that the responsible choice is not asking for help from anybody. And I think that attitude, which I think is something that we've played in him throughout the series, really comes to a head in this season. And that kind of thinking, although you understand where it comes from, gets him into some trouble. And so I think this episode is really helpful and instructive in telling that story.
Yeah. And going forward, though, there are people there. Obviously we see Diane, really sort of reach out when, she, for all intents and purposes, shouldn't. I mean, Bojack's been awful. I mean, he's been terrible, but yet she's still there.
Yes, I think that's true, and that's a big theme of the season as well, which is less played in this episode, is about Diane's conflicted feelings about her friendship with Bojack, which really, is something I think a lot of people in the limelight are thinking about right now, is their own relationships or culpability with problematic men, and how responsible are we for the actions of the people that we promote, and what is our own complicity in that, and how complicated is it when it's not just a famous person, but somebody that you love and have affection for, while also knowing full well all of their flaws and the misdeeds they've done, in which you may not forgive a stranger for, but it's harder when it's someone very close to you.
And that's the thing about this season too. You don't see it as much in this episode, but obviously the timeliness of some of these topics that and the interesting fact that you wrote this season before a lot of what went on in Hollywood.
Yeah, well, we were writing it I don't want to give ourselves too much credit, but yeah, we had the bones of the season. We kind of knew where it was going, and then some events happened, and we had to kind of lean into the curve a little bit. Like, there was a line, we have an episode where we have this character, Vance Wagner, who's this problematic male figure who has had numerous, I'm trying to speak delicately about this.
Sort of Mel Gibson-esque.
Mel Gibson is a good way to put it. He's a Mel Gibson type. And it's about his new comeback, and there's a line that Diane had said in the original draft, something about why do we never hold men accountable, and then we started holding men accountable, and we had to change the line, but we changed it to we love. I don't know the exact wording, but something along the lines of, we love holding new men accountable, but meanwhile we keep forgiving all the men with the old stuff we already knew about. And sadly, that remained true. It didn't undercut the episode as much as I wished it had. This new kind of idea that we're going to start holding people accountable for the things they did.
But nonetheless, this season was also, it's the series in general is pretty meta, but this was a very meta season with, whattimeisIt.com and Filbert itself sort of being, a trope of these dark dramas that we see right now. So this was a lot of fun. As folks in the industry watch, you must have heard a lot of reaction from people as well this season.
Yes, I think so. But I think it's.
It's a lot of like, oh, you guys are so funny. You guys got it all figured out. We're all doing it wrong, and you guys are just.
Well, no, but I think for me, so much of the season is about how we're all doing it wrong. Like and my own kind of discomfort and ambivalence with it, right? And that, I think that art is incredibly powerful, and I think when you are creating popular art, you have the power to move people, and you have the power to change people's opinions about things. And I think it is very important that we, the ones who are doing that, keep in mind that power, and that if we say, if we want to pat ourselves on the back and say, we have the power to change things for good, I think that means we also then have the power to change things for bad. And I think a lot of this season is me and the other writers grappling with this idea of this problematic male figure, and are we sanitizing him too much? And what does it mean to make an audience relate to a problematic character? And are we letting him off the hook just by virtue of sympathizing with him? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's been interesting to be a part of that, and and it certainly instigated a lot of conversations in and around the show.
Yeah.
For a number of years now, sort of these ongoing conversations that in these very sort of complicated times. But what's been kind of admirable has been Raphael's willingness to constantly push himself towards the edge of that and ask the questions, and not, all jokes aside, not kind of not in any sort of sanctimonious way, but in a way that says, I don't know the answers to it, but I certainly want to talk about it so that we can start to point ourselves in that direction. And I think that's it's courageous in a certain level.
Yeah. And Will, having voiced Bojack now for several years, what is your sort of feeling toward the character when you sort of voice this character? What's your relationship with him? What's your take on Bojack?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what Raphael was saying too. You have to, you've got to be careful not to, your Bojack is a very complicated and a very faulty guy, and I think that I always sort of say quite glibly, but it's actually kind of true. Even though he's a horse, I think that he, in a lot of ways, having that kind of separation allows us to kind of get to the humanity in a way that it might be too scary otherwise. And I think, that Bojack is, we've always got to be careful not to make him too sympathetic. We don't look at it so that we don't feel sorry for him for what he's gone through. Yes, he's going through things that are difficult. Yes, that he's done terrible things, but it's not like we're looking to kind of see this redemption and say, look at this great guy who's been through.
Sorry, to cut you
Yeah,
off.
no.
But I think that one thing that was very important to us from the beginning was that you might feel sorry for him, you might sympathize with him, but he's not an aspirational figure.
Right.
Like, we didn't want him to be the cool badass. He's like the dumb, washed up badass. Like, he wants to be the cool badass, but he's so not. And that even maybe he's an object of pity, or because we want you to relate to him. We don't want it to just be like, oh, look at this asshole.
Right.
Who's gonna want to watch that for 5 seasons? But it's complicated.
And as you can imagine, having done it for a number of years now, there is a certain, it does become increasingly difficult to not let it kind of, seep in and on a certain emotional level. I know for Raphael and for myself, we've talked about it a lot.
Yes.
I mean, there have been a few times where we finished a recording and it's been quite glum, and I've kind of stared across through the glass at Raphael and just been like, hey, fuck you, man. And I drive home. There are lots of people in my life who know the drive home from Bojack records sometimes have been super dark.
Let me ask you, I'm curious, because I think for me, sometimes...
This says rap. Okay, I'm not very good at it, but I'll do it. So listen, folks. I'm terrible at it.
I think that's a wrap.
No, sorry,
No, I was gonna say, I'm just curious, because I find for me, writing it, sometimes it can be cathartic. I feel like I'm excising this darkness by doing it. Do you feel the opposite? Do you feel like you embody it and then it's stuck with you? Or do you feel like sometimes you get it out in the booth?
No, I definitely get it out, but you and I have discussed not to get too deep into it. I mean, I've had my own, we've all gone through things in life, and there were certain times where I actually at one point, and I won't just, describe or divulge when, but at one point I sort of pulled Raphael aside and I said, have I talked to you about this? You remember?
Yes, I remember
And
very
you said
well.
no, and we had it.
But, no, Will, it's very important you know I'm not making fun of you in this episode. I had
There
no
was something
idea.
that happened that I was like, oh God. But it was something that could happen to anybody.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah.
It's not one of the worst things, but
No.
just to be clear.
No. But it was still like.
It's heavy, not because it was.
It was emotional.
Yes.
Well, to wrap things up though, you mentioned that there can't really be a redemption to some degree, and you even allude to it in this episode. You can't have a happy ending, or you don't have a show. As we go into season 6, and we know obviously Bojack is trying to get some help at the end of season 5, but where can we go from there? It obviously can't be overnight just like everything's great, but
Right.
where do you go from here, and maybe what are some of the themes you're thinking about as we head into the next season?
Well, I think we don't want to narratively just feel like we're going in circles and telling the same story over and over again. Even though sometimes in a life it might feel like you're living the same story over and over again. And so we are trying to, I think the story of Bojack has always been a little bit 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 8 steps back. We're not always necessarily moving forward, but we are moving. And then there are definitely moments writing season 6 where someone will pitch a joke and go, that really feels like a season 2 Bojack joke. Like he's not that guy anymore. And so I think he is a different character in season 6 than he was even in season 5. Maybe not quite as different as he would like, or maybe different in some ways and not different in other ways. But I do think we're pushing the story forward in some exciting ways.
I think one of the things for me, and then I'll wrap. I think one of the things that I find that I think that Raphael does such a great job of with Bojack is that he's gone through all these things, and yet it's that he not that he doesn't learn from his mistakes. It's that he has all these experiences. He has all this sort of cumulative knowledge, and it doesn't necessarily always help him make the right decisions.
Right. You can't always externalize that knowledge.
and that burden is so heavy. You can imagine is so heavy.
It gets heavier and heavier.
And it gets heavier and heavier. To have the knowledge and do nothing with it, sometimes consciously is gotta be rough.
Well, I'm going to end with this because I want to put this out to the universe. I've been thinking about this ever since I brought up the idea of Will Arnett doing the one-man show of Free Churro. So, an evening with Will Arnett. First half hour, Free Churro. Second half hour, Magic as Joe Blue.
Oh, that was
Third half
amazing.
hour, Batman.
Oh,
Wow!
Coming to Netflix.
What a night!
wow.
Coming to Netflix. I just thrown it out in the universe. Louis
in.
K?
I'm in.
Make it happen. Okay.
You're like,
Congratulations on the Emmy nomination. This was the first ever, by the way, for Bojack.
First
This is
ever
about time.
Best animated series, Bojack Horseman.
So congrats on that, and looking forward to the next season. And all the best to both of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.